Hello, everyone, and welcome to another AOS Student Research Grant seminar series. My name is Robert Driver. I'm a postdoc at Duke University. And just I'll introduce the research grant briefly first, as I do each week, and then introduce the seminar series after that. And then we will introduce Brendan and get to our talk today. So, as you all already know, I'm sure, each year the AOS offers students and early career researchers funding through the AOS Student Research Grant. And each year the AOS receives many applications for this grant. Actually, we just got the numbers in for this year. There were, I believe it was almost 200. It was like 186 or so applicants. So it's a lot of people applying for this. So it's a competitive grant. To win it, you have to propose something that advances the field of ornithology while we're still remaining feasible as part of the budget limitations, usually part of a graduate dissertation or similar size project. So it's a pretty challenging grant to write. And the AOS Student Research Grant Seminar Series celebrates the challenging and innovative work of the AOS Student Research Grant recipients by sharing this work with AOS members. And so each week we'll, as we've been doing, we'll showcase the research and research plans of a 2023 or 2022 AOS Student Research Grant winner in a seminar-style format. And we're going for 15 weeks, and this is, I always forget what week it is. It's like 5 or 6 right now. And I want to thank everyone for being here for our seminar. Thank the AOS and the AOS Student Affairs Committee. Thank Chris Ann Handel for all the work that she's been doing promoting the seminar series and helping us run it, and Ramona Fletcher for being here helping us out. And especially thank Brandon, our speaker today. So before we get to Brandon's intro, I just want to mention to have everyone's microphone on mute. And if you have questions, there will be time for a Q&A session at the end of Brendan's talk where you can unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you would like and ask your question. You can raise your hand and I can call on you. There is a Q&A box that you can also use to ask your question. Or we have chat access now for all attendees, so you can also type your question in the chat. So many ways you can ask your question at the end of the talk. I want to remind everyone that this is an AOS sponsored event, so all participants are required to follow the AOS Virtual Meeting Event Code of Professional Conduct. And I will post a link to the AOS Virtual Meeting Event Code of Professional Conduct in the chat. And also please be aware that we're recording this talk. So in addition to the AOS Code of Conduct, which I'll place in the chat and everyone will see that, let me just make sure I do that because I keep forgetting to do that. In addition to posting that, I will post a post-seminar evaluation form, which would be very helpful for everyone to fill out so we can continue making this seminar as good as possible as we move forward here. And also, I'll post the contact information for the Student Affairs Committee if you have any questions about the seminar or about the committee in general. So, okay, and I'm going to remember to do that this time. Okay, so our speaker today is Brendan Graham, and Brendan is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Arctic Biology. So I was telling Brendan I'm going to go through all this, so it's going to take a few minutes. Okay, so Brendan's academic career began with a BS in biology from the University of Regina in Saskatchewan. And following graduation, Brendan gained a wealth of experience in ornithology, working as a field technician across various institutions in Canada and the US. I can't even say them all, working with burrowing owls, rose-breasted grosbeaks, pileated woodpeckers, and even bowerbirds. And then Brendan went on to get his master's degree in biological sciences at University of Lethbridge in Calgary, working on the phylogeography of hairy woodpeckers with Dr. Teresa Berg. His master's work is published in the Journal of Avian Biology. And then Brendan began his PhD at the University of Windsor in Ontario, working with the cultural evolution of rufous and white wrens under Dr. Dan Mennel. Brennan has published extensively, oh my gosh, on rufous and white wrens. His research is published in Current Zoology, Bioacoustics, Ecology and Evolution, Behavioral Ecology, Journal of Evolutionary Biology, Proceedings of the Royal Society B, and Journal of Avian Biology, and of course, Ornithology. And then following his graduation in 2016, Brendan returned to Teresa Berg's lab at University of Lethbridge, now as a postdoc, working on a variety of projects on Canada jays, greater sage grouse, golden crown kinglets, white crowned sparrows, warbling vireos, chickadees, rhinoceros auklets, and even tufted puffins. And his research on these projects was published in Ecology Evolution, Scientific Reports, Journal of Ornithology, Biological Journal of the Linnean Society. It's almost crazy saying all these, but he works so hard, so I'm going to say them all. Journal of Avian Biology, Heredity, Canadian Journal of Zoology, and of course, both
Oh,
ornithology and ornithological
oh,
applications.
oh,
So in 2022,
oh,
Brendan began his current postdoc position at the Institute of Arctic Biology at University of Alaska Fairbanks, working on the impact of wildfires on Alaskan birds using acoustic monitoring. And Brendan won the AOS Student Research Grant twice. He won the Wetmore Award, which is the sort of molecular one, I think, in 2013 as a PhD student. And in 2023, he won the Post-Doctoral Award. And in addition to the AOS award, Brennan has won the Frank Chapman Award from AMNH, another small society, ornithological grant, and the Animal Behavioral Society student research grant, as well as the prestigious Alberta Conservation Association research grant. Okay,
goodbye.
so with that, I will turn it over to Brennan for his talk, The Impact of Wildfires on the Vocal Output of Boreal Bird Communities in Alaska.
Okay, well, thanks for that very thorough introduction. I really
You're welcome.
appreciate it. Okay, so just going to start here, and I'll just preface everything like this is still very much a work in progress. So today, this is just more or less going to be an update on sort of the data I've collected and just sort of the approach I've used so far. But before I start, I'd just like to recognize that the UAF Trotheta campus here in Fairbanks is located in the ancestral lands of the Dene people of the Lower Tana River. And from this picture, you can kind of see a lot of trees and forests. So can sort of see why like UAF is considered the tree campus of the USA, I believe. That's what the sign says. And I wasn't really sure, we're up here in Alaska. Maybe a lot of people haven't been up to Fairbanks before, but I just thought I'd show a map here. So you can see we're located here, pretty far north, amongst the White Mountains. The Denali National Park is really close by too. But it's a really diverse area here, and we're in the boreal region. So, only a few hours up the Dalton Highway to the Arctic Circle. And again, here's just another photo of Fairbanks to get an idea of just how diverse it is in terms of like it's a very forested area. And it's pretty interesting because I think a lot of times we live in these cities that might have forested areas, but really this is just a forest where a bunch of people live. Couldn't find it, but sometimes from UF campus you can look down and it looks pretty much just like a forest, and you wouldn't know there's a city there, except you can see the golden arches of McDonald's sticking up just above the tree line, which I always kind of get a kick out of. And the other thing about too is that there's a real diverse community of birds around here. And this is one of those areas where climate change is really going to affect, the plant and animal life around here. Here's some ptarmigans. There's these domes, which we call them, which are kind of these elevated regions. 'Cause it's pretty flat around, but we have these really specialized birds like ptarmigan up there. You can see northern wheat ear. And then quite a lot of other, forested species that inhabit this area of the world. And so I think one of the big things with climate change, at least I've noticed from living in the West, is that the fire seasons are getting worse. You don't even really have to be close to the source of the fire, and it can get really smoky. Living on the prairies in Canada, we would experience like, you know, 4 or 5 days or a week where it'd just be really smoky and unpleasant to go outside. And it was actually very, unhealthy for you to be outside from the air pollution. And these were, fires that were thousands of kilometers away from California and Oregon. And up here in Alaska, we experience similar problems now when the forest fires are going, or wildfires, and it could get really smoky for like a week or so at a time. And you just almost really trapped inside because it's really unpleasant to be outside, and the smoke can get really thick some days. And I think this increasing prevalence of wildfires and sort of the severity of them is really one of the impacts of climate change. here in the West. And of course, I probably don't need to say too much about that with the recent wildfires in California and the damage they've done. And as I sort of said before, smoke is a real sort of side effect of it, and it gets real smoky. This is Emerald Lake in Yoho National Park, BC. It's a really beautiful place to be. Normally, the lake is emerald green. It's this really beautiful color. But we went there for about 3 or 4 days, and it was so smoky at that time that we didn't really see, the color of the lake and how pretty it was until the last day, I think, because the smoke just kind of settles in and it doesn't go anywhere if there's no sort of, wind to blow it away or rain to sort of put out the fires. And the one thing that when you're walking around, you think about how unpleasant it is for you, you know, at least we can go inside, turn on the air filter and, you know, get reprieve from the fire. But for a lot of animals, you start to wonder like how do they cope with these fires and smoke, and how does that affect their health? I think this is an important question to ask, and it's maybe something that we're not really familiar with in terms of the true, short-term or even or long-term effects of smoke on their health. Because you read all the papers about smoke inhalation and how it's very damaging to your lungs and especially for animals like birds, which are do a lot of energetic expenditure, either singing or migrating and flying around. You have to think that it's got to be pretty difficult for them to manage this smoke. And I just go back to the map here of Fairbanks. I just want you to kind of look at here. I'll use my pointer area. You can see the Alaska Range comes across here, and then the White Mountains here up above. We're sort of in this like three-sided dome, and it's very flat. And so when these fires happen, and the smoke starts to come in, it gets the three-sided dome is really flat. It's not very windy around here, so the smoke can really settle in the lower elevation areas. And so when that happens, we're just kind of socked in, and we experience sort of like long-term or like we'll experience a few days where it could be really severe, the smoke. And again, it's just really unpleasant to be outside. Um, and air pollution is a really key topic here in Alaska. So I don't know if you probably never heard about this, but in the winter, we have these extreme temperature inversions. So where the higher areas actually get warmer and it gets much colder in the lower elevation areas. And a side effect of this is this phenomenon called the ice fog. And so what happens is because people are using wood stoves, and so they burn a lot of wood, is all the pollution and smoke from that just sort of settles in the lower elevation areas, and we get like this really foggy um, phenomena happening. And so I think I was reading previously that, I think Fairbanks is one of the most polluted places in the United States based on air quality because of the use of wood fires. And so, air quality just isn't kind of a 2 or 3 month worry. It's sort of it's a annual worry in terms of the health of people. Excuse me. And so, thinking back to climate change and how it's influencing wildfire patterns, what are sort of the impacts we see on the wildfire regime here in Alaska as a result of climate change? I found this really nice PDF online that had some really good points, and so I just sort of uh, adapted here for my slide. But one of the big things that we've seen, seasonal temperatures are increasing, so they've risen almost 2 degrees since 1925. And so, it's not hotter here. It can mean that it ends up being drier than what it was traditionally like. Um, See that snowpack forms about a week later in the fall, but then snow is also melting 2 weeks earlier. And then we see a longer fire season. So May to September, risk of fire, depending on, how much snowfall we see of year, how dry it is, fires can start relatively early, and then as you've seen in other places, they can continue quite late into the fall. And then obviously the big thing too is like the area burned by fires has increased quite a lot compared to what it historically was like. And then we've seen an increase in number of areas reburned. So these are areas that were burned once and they get burned again. So there's not a lot of time for some of these areas to recover if they're continually being burned, and that's sort of changing the habitat of the landscape. And then finally, we're starting to see more fires in the tundra. So if the boreal forest with a lot of it's got trees that are well adapted to sort of, or they're used to these fire regimes, but in the tundra, you know, there's not a lot of history of these fires, and so I think that some of the species there might be more susceptible to it. And so I found this graph just to sort of quantify the level of area burned over the last 20 years, I think, or 25 years, 1993. So I guess it's 33 years. You can see we've got a few years here like 2004, 2015, and 2023 where we're seeing huge areas burned. The median sort of area burned is around 373,000 acres. Um, this graph was produced obviously on July 19th of 2023. Oh, sorry, one second here. Baby's singing at the same time. But you see 2023 at that point, there wasn't a lot of fires. It was a historically low year for fires. But I was able to collect the data here so you can see that it was below the average. So we had just under 300,000 acres burned. But then last year was more severe. We had almost double the area burned. So see, there's like large amounts of areas that are being affected by these wildfires. Um, Here you go. And so excuse me. Um, so like these burns are affecting quite large areas, and I think they're becoming a real problem here in Alaska. And some species like blackback woodpeckers, other woodpeckers might be better suited to it, when fires come through and they burn areas, these species move in and sort of explore food resources. But, there's also maybe some species that are not going to respond well to these. And, just with that idea of increased fires in the tundra, like in the Arctic, probably a lot of these species are not really used to fires and not well suited to them. So conducting studies in this sort of corner of the world, I think is really important because I think it's going to give us a lot of baseline knowledge about how fires act or influencing species, especially in some of these newer areas where they may be expanding. And what does that mean for sort of population dynamics of some of these birds, many of which are specialists in these areas. And so, my previous experiences with birdsong, and of course, it's an energetically expensive activity. And so, in 2022, when we first moved here, we had a week or so where it was smoky and you're walking around wearing your mask and it's just really unpleasant. And, you start to think like, how does this affect these animals, especially in terms of doing these activities like singing, where you're going to expend a lot of, energy. Um, all this wildfire smoke is going to, it damages lungs, has long-term effects on sort of your cardiovascular health. It kind of seems that singing, when it's smoky, should probably decrease just because it's probably not a very useful thing to do and probably like detrimental to your long-term health. And so, what I just want to do was just kind of do a very sort of simple survey project and just look at vocal output and see if they decrease their amount of singing when it gets smokier, when air quality decreases. And so, you know, my sort of prediction would be that when air quality is good, we'll see high vocal output, but as it gets poorer, we should see vocal output sort of fall off in a lot of these species. And then the other thing I want to look at too, along with this, is see how elevation interacts with air quality. So, as I mentioned, the wildfire smoke tends to settle here in the lower elevation areas. And granted, we don't have really high areas around. There's a few sort of uh, domes around surround Fairbanks. They're probably around they're between like 750 and 1,000 meters. So they're not really high, but it tends to be okay, sure. But it tends to be that like windier up there. So, with more wind, hopefully it'll blow the smoke out of the way. And it might be that those animals are sort of able to continue on, um, sort of with their daily activities more easily than some of these animals are living at lower elevations. Um, and so that was sort of the premise between my idea for the grant application. And again, just sort of like a predictive slide here that, if we were to look at high elevation and low elevation and intermediate elevations, we'd see differences in vocal output as air quality decreases. And so I'd just like to thank two Arctic Audubon for this project because okay, just a second. They were really helpful. I contacted them early on because I was kind of looking for areas to put. And as I mentioned, um, uh, you know, around here, it's a really forested area, and so without their help, I wouldn't have been able to sort of uh, sample along an elevational gradient, as well as I've been able to so far. And so I just emailed them early on, and then they just asked me to give a little write-up about the project, and then they sent it out to their members, and I had more responses than I had recorders for, um, which was really nice. And so, I've been able to meet people too, and it's been really a good sort of way to meet people around here. Okay. And then I just have a map here of how it's sort of distributed across. So, I've got one in my backyard, um, which is a good way for me to sort of figure out when it's time to go change batteries. Um, we've got a nice mix of birch and spruce around our area, so we get boreal chickadees and black-capped chickadees, and then in the summer we've got lots of warblers around too. So it has its own merits, based on the birds around here to use. But then I've been able to kind of get up higher into the hills too as a result, because of those landowners who allowed me to put their recorders in their yard. Okay. Um, and then I just sort of got an elevation here. So the black dots are oh yeah, are the sites that I've sampled so far. And then the orange triangles here are ones that I'd like to get to. Unfortunately, the first year I had one site that was on public land in the wildlife refuge, or in the Audubon sort of wildlife refuge, and someone went and stole my recorder. So I've been a bit gun shy about putting on public land, like these public areas. But I've sort of put in grants to get more money to start these because it'd be nice to get up in those higher areas, and put them up there too. Where again, as I said, there's not a lot of high elevation places in Fairbanks. I'm sort of limited where I can do this, but we've been able to sample sort of the lower elevations and the intermediate around here. Um, and then I've just been using these Swift One recorders. So they've been really great. I've just been recording every hour of the day, pretty much from May to the end of July. And just for about 10 minutes of each hour. And sorry here. And they've been working really good. Like I've been just sampling at 32 kilohertz because we don't really have any birds that sing above 16 kilohertz. And so it's been a good way for me to sort of maximize battery power and limit the recording files that get saved, because those can get pretty large pretty quick. Um, and so then that means that I don't have to go out and change the batteries as often as I might if they were running longer and saving bigger files. And then so the first year I was a little bit late putting up, but I recorded from about May 14th to August 6th. And then last year I recorded from the beginning of May to the end of July. And I kind of learned from the first year that there was no real reason to be recording into August because the birds end up, they stop singing pretty much early July. And then, the last 2 to 3 weeks of July are probably long enough to catch any sort of stragglers that might be singing. And then, you might think it's weird to be recording all day long for 24 hours, but in the summer, the sun never sleeps kind of. This is the solstice here. You can see it just moves across the horizon. And so I think I know there's been some work done looking at sort of uh, phenological difference in singing, but I think it'll be really neat to just sort of look and see if we've got some species that, sort of follow that sort of traditional dawn chorus pattern of singing early in the morning, maybe a little late before dusk, but when there's no dawn or dusk to really to chart that, I'm sort of curious to see if some species will kind of show less pattern. I know white-crowned sparrows around here, they seem to sing at all hours. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you can hear them out singing, and there'll be, two or three of them singing with each other. So I think it'll be really interesting. I've also been kind of, I don't think I'll have too many on it, but it'd be really cool if you were able to get some of these animals that we traditionally think of as nocturnal animals like owls and see what their calling patterns look like. Hopefully in the future, that's something I could look at because, in you read a lot of these children's books. The little one who's sitting in my lap here, and they're always sort of talking about owls sing at night, and then you up here in the summer for 2 months where there's no real dark. You start to think, well, is that really true? And do these patterns hold up? So yeah, and then the air quality data collection. So I've just been getting from the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, so they make it readily available. Okay, you go. Sorry. Um, 1 second. Come here. Oh, geez. Um, so they've got four sensors set located around Fairbanks, and then the unit I've been measuring is PM 2.5. So this is a particulate matter, but lower than 2.5, I think micrograms. And this is the one that's seen as most detrimental in terms of health because it's really small stuff. It gets into your lung and passageways and things like that, and it's been shown to affect the health of wild animals and humans too. And so that's sort of my measure of air quality. Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Sorry. 1 second. Here you go. Sorry. Okay. What I figured would happen happened. So I'll get you one after. Yeah. Yeah. And then, sir, I just have like a quick slide here to show you um, the air health quality recommendations. You can see anything less than 50 is deemed sort of good air quality. Um, Moderate is 51 to 100. You can see like it gets about unhealthy once you get the PM2.5 is above 150 micrograms per meter cubed, um, which is something just to look at for, I think the next slide, 2 slides later, I'll show you sort of what the smoke conditions have looked like around here the last 2 years. And for birds, there's this recent paper in Ornithology that suggested that anything above 35 should maybe be considered a potential harm to birds. So, uh, yeah, there you go. And so here's 2023. You can see again, that was a really low fire year. Um, and it didn't really get smoky until pretty much about the 1st of August, which was good for us because we were able to have a really, nice summer outside and not worry about that. But also, it kind of didn't really match up with my ability to sort of see how it affected singing during the breeding season because by this time, a lot of the birds had stopped singing. They're starting to migrate, sort of, at least the songbirds are starting to migrate like near the end of July, early August. Um, but then last year, you can see we had this sort of week of smoke where there's a couple large fires around Fairbanks. And you see it got really bad too. Like it's above, there's quite a few. This is hourly data. Um, so there can be fluctuations during a day, but the average of these was well over 150, 200 some days. It was really quite harsh. Um, and so again, this sort of it worked for me in terms of like it fell during sort of the late part of the season where they're still singing. They kind of stopped singing around here like the first week of July. I've noticed the last 3 years, just when I'm out recording, before then you can go out and kind of record birds sort of readily, but after that, it's pretty hard to find them singing. They might sing a little bit, but they're just kind of one-off songs. Um, and then, you know, this isn't really a result, but it's more of an anecdotal explanation. This is from the top of Murphy Dome, so one of those high areas. I think it's around 800 meters elevation. But on that sort of the worst day, you can see the sun there. It's just this kind of red glowy dot here, but it was really smoky up there even. So I don't know, if the conditions aren't right, even some of those birds at high elevations may be exposed to really harsh levels of air quality. Uh, and then I just sort of put a list together of the birds I've seen. I've been collecting acorns. Yellow warblers and yellow rump warblers are pretty common, pretty much anywhere. These Townsend warblers are also common in some of the areas of spruce. White ground sparrows are pretty common in the low elevation areas. I think I've got pretty much Hammond's flycatchers on a lot of the recordings, which is kind of exciting because I feel like they're one of those species that are sort of underrepresented in terms of literature. I think a lot of for me the time I only really thought about them was I want to be out banding and you'd catch an Impedinex flycatcher that you weren't quite sure, and then you had to narrow it down between three or four. But they sing a lot, and they're pretty calm around here. So I think we'll be able to put some. I'll be able to like find some good data about their singing behavior. And then we've got violet green swallows and tree swallows, pretty common. And then, oh yeah, I'll do that afterwards. And then, robins are common everywhere too. And then we've got juncos and ruby crown kinglets too. And they're really interesting because they sort of sing more at the beginning of May and then their song tails off. And so, I think that might be one sort of aspect that'll be tricky is when I'm sort of trying to look at the different species, I need to sort of account for sort of their singing phenology because yeah, the ruby crown kinglets sing a lot during May and then they kind of fall off almost to the point where you think they might have disappeared. But they are around, they're breeding, you'll see them around. And Juncos are the same way too. They sort of just tail off, I think, late May, early June. And then there's also a lot of resident birds around here in terms of, hairy and downy woodpeckers. We've got boreal and black-capped chickadees, Canada jays, and nuthatches. And I think one of the issues with them too is that they don't sing sort of, or their vocal output sort of peaks before the migratory birds get here. And so they might be a lot more tricky to sort of pick up on on my recorders. I know that one of them, the recorder is set near a hairy woodpecker nest, so I'll be able to that one that was pre-active because they're actively feeding it every time I went there to change the recorder batteries. But they might be a little bit more tricky. So, they, especially with the chickadees, you start to see them really making, communicating again in early August. And so it might be that, as I sort of figure out um, the best time to record and things like that, I might just have to record later into August to get these guys to sort of get an idea, especially if we're going to see later uh, forest fires like we did see 2023. Um, and so. just moving forward, I'm going to continue to do this at least for a few more years. Like I've got 2 years. So the first year, as I said, there wasn't really a fire. It lacked serve as a good sort of reference point, I think. Last year, um, we had the fire. And, like one of the tricky things about this too is like as much as you're trying to look for the link between them, like it's not an experiment that you're manipulating on your own. So you can't just make it be smoky. And as I said before, none of us really want to be smoky at all because it's not great when it's like that. But I'm going to keep recording, this summer and probably a few more and hopefully get a nice like long-term data set to sort of put this together and maybe hopefully that'll help tease out the patterns for like as many species as I can. Um, and then the last slide here is I'll just close with again, we're in this unique situation or in this unique area that if anyone's interested in recordings, um, that I'm out there, I'm recording a lot of things for my own project, but there's plenty of opportunity, I think, to collaborate. If anyone's ever coming up here to do field work, they can just send me an email too, and they need a place to stop and do laundry or they need help figuring things out, I'd be happy to help out. And there's an acknowledgement. I'll apologize for a bit of the chaos and interruptions. I was a last minute babysitting duty today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. And thank you again for the opportunity to talk today.
All right, great. Thanks a lot for a great talk, Brandon. Enjoyed a lot of the visuals and excellent multitasking
Oh no.
ability. I would not be able, I would get too distracted, I think. Um, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can just write them or let us know in one of the various ways that I mentioned earlier. Um, I'll start off. Um, I was one very simple question I had was where is the measurement of the air quality taking place from the Alaskan service? Like, would that will only correspond to one of your elevations, right?
Yeah, so right now it's just gonna, I think the airport is where one of the main sensors is,
Mm.
and then there's one east of town. But I'm just gonna sort of right now use the just use the daily average. It'd be nice
Mm.
to buy some sensors at some point and set them up. The other thing too is uh if I want more sort of uh if I want them close to this areas, there's the purple air sensors, I think. I think that if you sign up for their subscription, you can gain access to that data. Um, looking at it on the days when it's really smoky, there is some variation, but when it's bad, it's just bad, right? It's sort of above that threshold of 35 or 150. And so, I think that as of it's one of the things that, yeah, it would be nice to have from everywhere, but it's one of those things that I might have to tweak as we go along. And so for now, I've just been using that sort of averaged site from, I think they must average it across the four sensors they have located.
Oh, okay, I see. I was
Yeah,
just wondering if you ha yeah.
oh, but they'd all be in the city, I think, at the lower elevation. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So if you had that wide range of elevation, like in your goal future study sites, would you need another measurement to capture those higher pollution or no? Or you
I
could
think it would probably be a good idea, because it's like a 40-minute drive to get up to them. So I can't be going up
mm,
every day just to take a look and
okay. Yeah.
get an idea.
See if it's smoky or not, and then drive back
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Megan Massa says thank you, Brandon. Um, and then I have another question. I was wondering, so like when you were first talking about the birds or animals in general breathing in the smoke,
Yeah.
um, I had never thought of that before. I'm sure a lot of people who you present to or share this idea with just have never thought of that. Um, Obviously, I think about the um the fire's impact on destroying like their habitat, but don't think about their lungs and stuff like that. So is there like physiology research on this topic, or have people looked at the impact of you did mention the lungs and the heart system, I think, when you were talking about singing birds, but is there some research on that?
Yeah, so when I was reading for this, I found a few papers and they showed that, again, this is sort of out of my area of expertise, so my
Yeah, I
language,
don't know anything of, yeah.
but did show that, like, I think, uh, things like asthma increase, and also, shoot, I'm trying to remember, and like I think, like, pulmonary sort of disorders increase and things like that. There's been a few lab studies where
Hmm.
I guess they probably do with doves or zebrafinch or things like that. I
Hmm.
can't
And
remember.
put the smoke in.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and they show that, like, when they do sort of like the histology work for it, or maybe they dissect them. I can't remember now again,
Mhm.
but they show that, yeah, there's damage done to sort of their lungs and their trachea and things like that.
Oh, interesting. I would assume it's hard to get blackback woodpeckers into a lab or like outside a flycatcher or something, but it would be cool if you could see that they have a
Yeah.
natural ability to somehow resist that.
Yeah.
But yeah, very cool. Yeah, great stuff. Not a topic that I know much about, but
Yeah.
that's the whole point of the AOS seminar
Yeah.
series here.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm still learning too, It's just when I came up here and you're just like, what can I do up here? And then you just
yeah.
walk around, you're like, oh, this is awful. And you think, well, how awful is it for everybody else here, right?
Yeah, I like how that's what inspired you, and that was the motivation
Yeah.
behind it, thinking about how the birds are feeling right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, oh, I am very sorry. I missed a, Q&A in the Q&A box. I apologize that after I advertised for the Q&A box. Okay, so Megan writes, I'm curious how the prairie species might be impacted different than woodland passerines, especially those with large displays and I think she means lecking behavior, but larking behavior, but or lecking behavior, maybe larking, that might increase their heart rate and air intake.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. But yeah, like, because there's a lot of tundra areas here. The one really interesting thing about Alaska is, like, the tundra occurs at much lower elevations than it does in other areas. And so when you get up in those mountains, there's lots of this tundra habitat, and there's, the ptarmigan, and we've got lots of grouse up here. But I would assume that behavior too would be affected by wildfire smoke. And again, maybe it's less of an effect for them when they're doing those behaviors, because I think they're probably, they tend to uh, gather on their leks early in the spring, like maybe April. So maybe they're able to avoid that, but I don't know. That's a good question too. Again, there's lots of these system or species here that are probably not model species, but it doesn't mean that the the interest or questions about them is any less interesting. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, but I imagine that would be something that would affect them.
Yeah, it's a good question because you're exploring some auditory impact on their auditory cues, and that would be impact on their visual
Yeah,
cues as well. So yeah, lots of things to explore on this topic.
yeah.
So uh, thanks, Chris Ann, for reminding me about the Q&A box. And yeah, now I'm looking in all the different boxes, and I think that's it for the questions. So if that's it, we'll thank Brendan here for a great talk and informing us on the topic, and we'll return here next week for next week's seminar. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks again.
All right, see ya.
See you.